Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Low Spec Labs. A year ago, we came on this channel and we started reading through the RHCSA to learn some Linux fundamentals. 26 chapters, and about 9 months later, we wrapped that up. Now, having read the book and taken the exam, was it worth it? Yes, it was. Reading the book gave me the knowledge, and coming here and trying to teach you what I learned through reading the book helped me practice that knowledge. And then I went to test out this new idea I came up with. Not really came up with, I really just stole it. I read somewhere online that the best way to learn is to teach, and they were right. I had figured out a new life hack, boys. And so I shall be coming on this channel and teaching you. And the meta here is I shall be teaching myself. And so I shall always be leveling up and learning new skills. And isn't that amazing? The endless pursuit of knowledge and self-betterment. What shall I do with this endless knowledge? Now, let's learn about Microsoft Azure. What is Azure? It's Microsoft's new cool cloud services, boys. That's right. It is all your favorite parts about dealing with Microsoft, but in the cloud. And in many ways, it is in fact better. But again, it is Microsoft. If they were reasonable, they wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar corporation. They have some cool technology that honestly impresses me, and I like to learn how to use it. And so we shall learn how to use it together. Or rather, I'll pretend like I know what I'm talking about until eventually I do. And then you too shall know what you're talking about one day. All right, so let's get started. What is MS Azure? Azure is a cloud computing platform created by Microsoft. So it's a collection of services that includes Azure, Entra, Teams, 365, Exchange, SharePoint, and a lot more. I learn about a new service. Well, it used to be every day, but nowadays it's like every now and then I get surprised. I'm like, what? They provide a service for that? Yes, they do. Microsoft will provide a service for everything. One day Microsoft is going to provide a service to replace you. That's right. But we're not here to talk about the eventual AI takeover of all human soft skills. We're here to learn how to use Azure. Someone's got to maintain the AI, boys. And we're here to learn how to do just that. Not quite yet, but I believe this is the beginning of something beautiful. Now, let's continue. Azure can be broken down into more or less 3 core services if you think about it from a very high level. What are those services? Those services are compute. So that would be virtual machines, applications, serverless functions, right? Basically anything where a computer is involved in processing, I would tag as compute. Don't worry, we're going to elaborate on this. It gets complicated. Storage. So storage would be blob storage would be a good example. Or just raw database storage like Cosmo DB or just SQL. Any database or cloud or file-based storage system would be tagged as storage. Networking. So this would be your firewalls. This would be your VNets and subnets. This would be the private tunnels you build between your on-site networks and the cloud. Lots of stuff here. So why Microsoft Azure? Why use this over other services? Well, because despite the sarcastic comments and jokes I might make on this channel, Microsoft actually has something amazing here. Let's talk about some of the key features that are rather impressive when it comes to Azure 365 or whatever Microsoft wants to call its Hydra services. So when it comes to learning a bunch of services, the best place is to start somewhere. And that somewhere is Microsoft Entra, previously known as Azure Active Directory. They changed the name because people got confused. Entra fulfills similar functionality to Active Directory, but it is not a drop-in replacement for Active Directory. And so Microsoft decided to change. Anyways, let's talk about Entra. So what are some of the key? So what is Microsoft Entra ID? Well, Microsoft Entra ID is used to create and manage users and groups and their access to devices and applications inside of your organization. Some of the key features of Entra include connecting your on-premises Active Directory to Azure, allowing you to use the same credentials for local and cloud resources. Some small businesses can even get away with using Entra without an on-premises Active Directory server. I know. And then controls access to SSA's products. So generally, you'd want to set up Entra and Azure ID in order to access 365 applications like, well, Office 365, Outlook, SharePoint, different stuff like that. They all rely and integrate with Entra. So if we're going to talk about interactive directory, we have to talk about tenants. So what is a tenant? A tenant is a folder or directory of users, devices, and applications inside of an organization. You can think of tenants in the same way as you would think of domains inside of Active Directory. They perform similar functionality, but again, they are not the same thing. After the concept of the directory or domain or tenant, we have the concept of subscriptions. So subscriptions are billing units. It's basically how Azure is going to charge you for the different resources you use inside of it. But subscriptions are not just billing units. There's more. There's always more. Come on. Your subscriptions are not just billing units or a way to track how much of what resources you're using. They're also security boundaries. Subscriptions allow for resource isolation. Basically, subscriptions are logical boundaries that group together Azure resources like virtual machines and storage accounts. Subscriptions, like so, would store the virtual machines for company A, company B, and company C. But they would also act as security boundaries. So the resources of company A would be separate from the resources of company B and company C. The cool thing is you can also go in and configure things so that company A can communicate with the resources of company C, and company B communicate with the resources of company A, and of course company C communicates with company B. But that is an explicit configuration you have to go in and define. So if you're working in Azure Entra 365 Exchange, I'd say about 30 to 40% of your day-to-day tasks is going to be doing something with managing users and groups and permissions and application access. So what is a user, or what are users? Good question. I wrote this down somewhere. So what is a user? A user represents a single identity that is either for a person or application within your organization. So maybe you have a logging service that has an account on multiple servers. That would be an identity. Phil from accounting, who tells you long-winded stories. He's a nice guy. He just rambles on quite a bit too long. He is an identity. You, the admin inside of your organization, are an identity. All of these people and applications are users inside of your tenant. So what is a user? A user represents a single identity that is either for a person or application within your organization. So maybe you have a logging service that has an account on multiple servers. That would be an identity. Phil from accounting, who tells you long-winded stories. He's a nice guy. He just rambles on quite a bit too long. He is an identity. You, the admin inside of your organization, are an identity. All of these people and applications are users inside of your tenant. We know what users are, but did you know there are different types of users? Yes, that's the more part I mentioned a little bit ago. And when it comes to users, there are four you should more or less know. Let's get down to them. The first user you should know are cloud users. So what are cloud users? Cloud users are users created directly inside of Azure AD, and they are managed only in the cloud, hence the name cloud users. After cloud users, there are hybrid users. These are users synced from Active Directory to Azure AD, normally using a tool like Azure AD Connect or whatever they call it nowadays. They changed the name a few times. Normally with this setup, credentials are managed on premises and then synced upwards to Azure AD. This is useful because a user with an on-prem Azure AD account can then have access to Azure services. What are guest users? Guest users in Azure and Entra are basically external users or users from either other Microsoft Entra tenants run by other organizations or from what are called B2C tenants, which are a way to interface your Entra tenant with your customers. And finally, we have service principals. So what are service principals? Service principals are basically machine accounts or application accounts. So they'd be a way to allow an application to authenticate against Azure AD. What is an Entra group? An Azure or Entra, a group is a collection of users that help simplify role assignments and access control. There are actually several different types of groups. Let's go through this. I want to get to the fun stuff. Now, let's start with the first one. That is an Entra security group. So Entra security groups are used to manage access permissions to Azure resources. Let's say you had a group like so, and in that group, you had virtual machines, just like that. And what we wanted to do was grant several users access to those virtual machines. What we could do is put all of those users into one group. And now everybody that we place into that group from here on out is now going to have access to those virtual machines because they are in that security group. There is also another type of group known as a Microsoft 365 group. This group is used for collaboration and often used to share emails and files. A lot of times when using 365 groups, it is going to be in the context of shared communication and collaboration. So you're going to be using it for shared emails, file sharing, Teams, as in Microsoft Teams, as well as group projects and shared mailboxes in Exchange. Next, we have dynamic groups. Dynamic groups are groups that are created based on user attributes. So normally you assign a user specifically to a group, but with dynamic groups, the attribute is what assigns that user to a group. So if you had an attribute, let's say we had a HR department. Let's say we had a department called HR. What we could do is then dynamically assign everyone that is part of the HR department to the HR group. What we could do is look at the department attribute for HR, and every user that is part of the HR department based on that attribute gets added to the HR group, like so. Last but not least, we have nested groups. So what is a nested group? A nested group is a group within a group. It is groupception. So basically, it is a group of only groups, right? You might want to do a nested group in case you want to have a security policy that targets multiple groups at the same time. Maybe you have a group of users called HR and a group of users called accounting, and you want them to have access to the same file shares. Well, you would place them into a operations group or a personnel group, and that group would consist of two other groups. And that is it. That is users and groups and Microsoft Entra. Thank you for watching. Right. Please tune in to the next video where we're going to go through some practical examples, more specifically how to sign up for Azure so you can spin up your own lab environment, how to create your first tenant, how to create your first user, and how to create your first group. And then we'll create some scripts to create a test environment to play around in. And hopefully I won't incur any costs. But if I do, I'll let you know so you don't make the same mistakes I do.